Hey, welcome to this video. Before this video starts, can I ask you a favor? I've got this little survey, right here. If you don't mind, it'd be nice if you can take a moment to fill it out. Just pause the video, there's a link in the description, or the comments, depending on where you're watching this. It's real simple, real quick, just to get some info on who's watching this. Done? Alright. This is Seattle, and this is the Duwamish River. It's a fine enough place and a decent view if you don't mind the industrial setting. But if you've ever been there, in particular if you've ever been out on the bridges or the banks, there's a good chance you've seen signs like this. Not the most uncommon thing in the world, but no fishing signs are usually a bit less specific, and don't tend to offer exemptions based on what you're fishing for. So, what's up with this particular river? Well, the story of how this river got here traces back to industrialization. For time immemorial, several Coast Salish Native American tribes, including the Duwamish, who the river is named for, have used the river as fishing grounds, a practice that, in spite of the pollution of the river, continues to this day. Over time, starting from the mid to late 1800s, European American presence grew, and consequently, occupation grew as well. Eventually, in 1913, straightening of the Duwamish River began, eventually reducing 9 miles of the meandering river into nearly half that distance, creating a 5-mile stretch ideal for the transport and movement of boats. Because of this change, the river became a massive hub for the swiftly growing industry of Seattle. With this industry came pollution. The factories built upon the new river banks and the ships that now traversed it introduced contaminants in vast quantities, over time leading to the present levels of contamination. This pollution, having grown for over a century at this point, has caused the Environmental Protection Agency to designate the lower 5 miles of the river as a Superfund site, meaning, in short, that it is both hazardous to human health and requires long-term effort to clean up. Though many people and groups work towards cleaning the river, it still remains a horribly toxic site in dire need of restoration. Now, that's all a problem. But just so we understand how severe it is, let's look at some solid data. The EPA has identified 45 different contaminants present within the river, and although these are found primarily in the sediment of the river, some of these contaminants haven't stayed put. Bottom-dwelling shellfish, like clams or crabs, inadvertently take in some contaminants as they feed, and when other, bigger animals eat them, those animals become contaminated. This process goes up and up the food chain, and, over time, results in bigger and bigger animals having more and more contaminants in their flesh. And that becomes a problem when we eat them. When the EPA assessed the river and found what contaminants were in there, they found that 4 of the contaminants were in the flesh of fish living in the river. These 4 contaminants were arsenic, CPAS, PCBs, and chlorinated dioxins and furans. Don't worry if you don't know what those are. What matters is that each of these is linked by studies carried out by various groups, including the EPA and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, to causing a slew of health problems, including cancer, when consumed. And this is known about. Those lengthy no-fishing signs we looked at earlier are because of this exact reason. Fishing the Duwamish is unsafe, with the only thing that's edible from it being migratory salmon who don't spend their lives in the river. But if someone wants to fish, be it for personal, cultural, or sustenance reasons, being limited to a seasonal, and in some cases, threatened population of fish just to be able to fish safely is a horribly restrictive obstacle. And as bad as that already is, there's still another layer to just how bad it gets. For, like many other places in American life, there's still the matter of racism that must be discussed. It's important to recognize that the pollution of the Duwamish River is not, in any way, shape, or form, fair in who it affects. According to 2010 census data, communities along the Duwamish River have a notably high non-white population, and other data, in the form of a 2010 cumulative health impacts analysis of the Duwamish Valley, shows that this population features high levels of poverty as well, and these facts pair together very poorly. Historically speaking, anyone who isn't white in America has been on the receiving end of the worst treatment this country has to offer. So seeing another example of this going on into the modern day is, quite frankly, utterly reprehensible. And for those who fall into the area's majority of being low income, the option of just going somewhere else to fish can be frankly non-existent. Between the costs of transportation or the investment of time, this incredibly important practice can be inaccessible to the point of non-existence. And all of this fails to even acknowledge the existence of Native American treaty rights to fish in the Duwamish River. The Treaty of Point Elliott states that the right of taking fish at usual and accustomed grounds and stations is secured to the numerous tribes who signed the treaty, including the Duwamish tribe and others who have been using the river for a lot longer than European Americans. This treaty, signed in 1855, is 167 years in age, and has been violated for well over half that. How can these accustomed grounds be assured for fishing if the fish aren't safe to eat? They simply can't. So, what needs to happen? What needs to change? Well, the easy answer would just be cleaning the river. But unless you happen to have a fleet of specialized equipment and employees just lying around, cleaning the river feels impossible. But it's not impossible. We are not nearly as powerless here as it might feel like we are. As bad as this situation is, there's still things we can do for the river. For starters, there's always more to learn. As much as I've tried to be thorough in this video, it's easy to miss things. For example, I haven't even mentioned the staggeringly lower life expectancies for people living in the Duwamish Valley, or the similarly stunning high rate of childhood asthma hospitalizations, simply because they aren't immediately related to the river. Overall, learning more is a great way to help you help the river, and there are plenty of ways you can help. Even if the massive, major cleanup work done by the Port of Seattle can't be done by us individuals, we can still work together to carry out smaller, but just as necessary tasks. Another option is volunteering with groups like the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, or the Duwamish Alive Coalition. These groups are people just like you, striving to go out there and make Seattle a more livable place. Alternatively, you can always donate to these groups to better allow their work to happen. Additionally, adding your signature to petitions for the Duwamish River shows that people want the Duwamish cleaned. Or, if you want to be a bit more direct, contacting your local representatives at a state or city level can also bring attention and help the river. Other more simple acts, such as practicing awareness and mitigation of your impact on the environment, can, in some part, reduce the amount of additional pollution suffered by the river. King County keeps a list of some steps you can take on their website, linked in the description below. There may not be a big, decisive action you can take, no single red button to push to make this problem go away. But even if there isn't any sort of coup de grace for ending pollution, there's many steps that we can take as people. If we all lift, we can get work done. And where we cannot work, if we all stand, we can make sure that those who are accountable to work do. So, come on in, Seattle. Let's make the water lovely.